Give people a few minutes to get online and we'll go ahead and get started. Ready to join? We'll give folks another minute and then we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. And we're so glad that you joined our webinar today. We will go ahead and get started as people continue to join. We just have an hour today, so we'll get right into it. My name is Eva Lathrop. To introduce myself, I'm an obstetrician gynecologist and the Senior Director for Reproductive, Maternal, and Newborn Child Health at Jhpiego, where I lead our broad portfolio of work in RMNCH across over 60 countries. It's my pleasure to be chairing today's webinar, Breaking Down Barriers, How to Make Tranexamic Acid Affordable and Available to Every Woman Diagnosed with Postpartum Hemorrhage. Tranexamic acid is proven to reduce deaths from severe bleeding after childbirth, including postpartum hemorrhage, yet not enough women receive this life-saving drug for myriad reasons, most often that it is unavailable or unaffordable. In many countries in Africa and South Asia, the human cost is far greater than the price of TXA, and this reality moved all of our speakers today to and find answers to these questions. Could new evidence and innovations, such as intramuscular tranexamic acid, help expand access? Why is product innovation important in order for TXA to reach more women? What would it take to make TXA more affordable in the countries where it will have the most impact? How can procurement, pricing, and supply strategies improve access to TXA and save lives? And what might it look like to put the findings from these questions into action? Stay with us for the next hour, and we hope to give you the answers to these questions. Today's session will be approximately 60 minutes in length, with opening remarks, 3 presentations, and a country spotlight, all delivered by our distinguished speakers today, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please click the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen and submit them there. If you can't see that Q&A icon, click the More button with the 3 little boxes at the bottom of your screen and select Q&A. The box will appear for you to submit your questions, and if you are directing your question to a specific speaker, please make that clear when you send in your question. This is a mixed language webinar with simultaneous interpretation in French and closed caption in Spanish and Portuguese. Please select the interpretation icon in the bottom corner to listen in your preferred language. Again, if you can't see that icon, select the More box with the 3 dots and select interpretation there. Please note that we have a speaker delivering their presentation in French. So for example, for the appropriate channel, and if you're an English speaker, get in there to interpretation, click English to follow along. Again, the closed captions are also available. To enable this, select the closed caption, turn on the translation, and select your caption language. If you can't see this, select the More box with the 3 dots. To introduce Allison Moran to provide us with opening remarks. Allison leads the Sexual, Reproductive, Maternal, and Newborn Health team in the Department of Sexual, Reproductive, Maternal, Child, and Adolescent Health and Aging at the World Health Organization. She has over 25 years of experience in research, programmatic implementation, and monitoring and evaluation of MNCH initiatives, with field experience in more than 20 countries. Currently, she holds an honorary appointment at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Allison, thank you so much for joining us, and please go ahead.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Eva, and thanks so much to the organizers for including us today. It's a great honor to be able to give some opening remarks for this webinar. And as all of you are aware, we know that postpartum hemorrhage is one of the most common complications of childbirth, and globally it accounts for nearly 1/5 of all maternal deaths, with approximately 70,000 PPH-related deaths every year, a tragedy that is both preventable and unacceptable. As Eva also mentioned, these are not just statistics, but these are mothers, daughters, and sisters whose lives could have been saved with timely and effective care. Therefore, at WHO, improving care before, during, and after birth to prevent and manage PPH and its complications is a necessary step toward achieving the health targets in the Sustainable Development Goal 3.1 to reduce a global maternal mortality ratio to less than 70 per 100,000 live births. So we have the tools, we have the strategies, and in 2025, WHO with FIGO and ICM jointly published a consolidated guideline for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of postpartum hemorrhage, bringing together all relevant WHO recommendations around preventing, managing, and treating postpartum hemorrhage. One of these recommendations is to use a standardized and timely approach to the management of postpartum hemorrhage, comprising an objective assessment of blood loss, very important, timely diagnosis, as well as use of a treatment bundle supported by implementation strategies for all women having a vaginal birth. If a postpartum hemorrhage occurs, the care bundle for first-line treatment includes rapid institution of uterine massage, administration of an oxytocic agent and tranexamic acid, as well as intravenous fluids, examination of the genital tract, and escalation of care as needed. There are also several implementation strategies that are cited in the guideline around on-site simulation-based and peer-assisted trainings, ensuring trolleys or emergency care cases with all medicines and devices, using champions, as well as audits to better understand some of the issues. So if this bundle is effectively administered, we know that among patients having a vaginal birth, it can lead to up to a 60% lower risk of severe postpartum hemorrhage, laparotomy for bleeding, or maternal death from bleeding compared to usual care. So it's a very effective intervention bundle. But it's important to remember that all elements of the bundle must be provided to ensure it's effective. And if you don't have tranexamic acid, then you don't have a treatment bundle. TXA has been recommended by WHO for the treatment of PPH for a while, and it is a part of the standard PPH treatment package. We know that tranexamic acid is cheap, easy to administer, and often available in healthcare settings because it's been used for trauma and surgery. It's already been included in the WHO Essential Medicine list since 2011, but for the treatment of patients with trauma. And this was updated in 2019 to include TXA as a core medication for reproductive health to treat postpartum hemorrhage. So these changes to the core list for the essential medicines really provides an opportunities for ministries of health, NGOs, national and international associations, professional associations, and civil society to advocate for including TXA. However, despite these global recommendations and the evidence base, we know there are several barriers to effectively implementing TXA as part of the PPH treatment bundle, especially at service delivery points. So this webinar today provides a really exciting opportunity to learn about what's working and not working so that we can really identify lessons learned and best practices together as a community combat PPH and reduce maternal deaths. Thank you so much, and back over to you, Eva.
Thank you so much, Allison, for setting the stage. And it's a great reminder. If you don't have tranexamic acid, you don't have the treatment bundle, which is why we're dedicating an entire webinar to tranexamic acid. So more to come. Thanks again, Allison.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Catherine Kerr. Catherine is an epidemiologist in the Clinical Trials Unit at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, with expertise in evidence synthesis and clinical trials. Her work focuses on systematic reviews and large international randomized controlled trials investigating the effects of tranexamic acid in women with severe bleeding, including the CRASH 2, 3, and 4 trials and the Woman, Woman 2, and IM Woman trials. Catherine will speak today on tranexamic acid for postpartum hemorrhage, evidence, guidelines, and future directions. Catherine, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to speak at this webinar. I'm really happy to be representing my group at the LSHTM. And we have, as a team, been researching, pretty much dedicated to researching the effects of tranexamic acid for about the last 20 years. And we have been involved in a large program of work, including mainly to do with these large clinical trials. And I'm proud to say that we have made quite a significant contribution to the evidence in this field. And I'm going to, in the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to talk about our trials and the wider evidence for the effect of tranexamic acid. It's the influence it's had on global guidelines, and also going to briefly introduce you to some of the ongoing research, which we hope will enable us that more women can receive tranexamic acid and therefore save more lives. Right, but before I begin, I just want to really spend a moment recognizing these two Japanese researchers, without whom we wouldn't be here having this webinar today. This is Uchiko and Shosuke Okamoto, and they were husband and wife researchers operating in very difficult circumstances in post-war Japan, who in this picture, they're working in their lab with their daughter. And they discovered the potent effects of the potent antifibrinolytic effects of tranexamic acid. So, and even though this happened many decades ago, it wasn't until relatively recently that the life-saving potential of tranexamic acid was actually realized. After it was discovered, it was used, and it was used for in a relatively limited way for some surgical procedures, particularly in people with clotting disorders. And it was also widely prescribed and available over the counter as for women who are suffering from heavy menstrual bleeding. But really, in terms of it as a potentially life-saving treatment, it was largely overlooked. However, that changed a couple of decades ago now, and I am proud to say that it was in part due to the involvement of the team that I work with at LSHTM, and it really began for us with the CRASH 2 trial. We were, and at that point, very much focused on research into trauma. And so the first trial that we did was CRASH 2, and that involved over 20,000 bleeding trauma patients. And we found that tranexamic acid reduced death in these patients. And actually but even before the results were known, but especially once the results were known, we had many obstetricians, particularly from our hospitals that we were working in the trauma, in the emergency departments, who approached us and were very much like, this is great that you're doing this work in trauma, but, in other parts of the hospital, we have women bleeding to death on a weekly basis, and they felt that there was no drug that they could give them. There was very little that they could do. So they were very much like, well, if it works for those patients, can we use it in our patients? And that really we had to act on that once we understood the need and also the potential for tranexamic acid that could have. If it worked in trauma, why wouldn't it work in postpartum hemorrhage? But we needed to do a trial to confirm that. And so that's why we instigated the woman trial, and so we started to move away from trauma into other areas of bleeding. So the woman trial randomized over 20,000 women with a diagnosis of PPH. And then as we got more favourable results, we moved into other bleeding conditions, and we've done trials in gastrointestinal bleeding, in traumatic brain injury. And then we started to move more into prevention. So we've looked at working with women with anemia giving birth. And we've also got some ongoing trials at the moment, such as Women 3, which is women menstruating women who have anemia. And we've also got the I Am Woman that's looking at alternative routes of administration, and which I will talk about a little bit later on. We've also got others in the planning that are not shown here. I should also say that we're not the only group that are involved in TXA research. I think largely emboldened by the promising results of CRASH 2, other groups have taken on and embarked on high quality, large trials to improve the evidence base for the effects of tranexamic acid across a range of bleeding conditions. And they really, together as a whole, we now have quite a strong evidence base for tranexamic acid. So what is the evidence? So this slide shows the results of a meta-analysis in which we have combined data from our trials and other large high-quality trials that have explored the effect of early tranexamic acid, that's within 3 hours of bleeding onset, on the effects of bleeding-related outcomes in some different bleeding contexts, so in trauma, in obstetrics, and in surgery. Now, I don't have time to go into the sort of underlying statistics of this, but really what this forest plot shows is that the effect of tranexamic acid on bleeding outcomes across clinical settings is remarkably consistent. The effect estimates that are shown, if you like, by the square boxes, all lie to the left-hand side of the vertical line, which is the line of no effect. And they're quite far away from this line. The confidence interval the horizontal line that shows the confidence intervals for each of these estimates do not cross 1. They're quite far from 1. And so really the message from this slide is quite simple. The effect of tranexamic acid on bleeding outcomes is quite consistent across bleeding contexts. It's quite large. The effect estimates are about 20 to 30%. Consistent with 20 to 30% approximately. And also they're quite definitive. We can be sure that it's not to do with random error. We can be confident in these results. If we're just focusing on PPH, because that's obviously our main interest in this webinar today, the effect estimate for reducing life-threatening postpartum hemorrhage is about a quarter, so it's 23%. That's what the evidence shows us. However, that's just only one part of the evidence. We know that it is effective on bleeding outcomes, but we also have to think about, is it safe? Now, tranexamic acid is an antifibrinolytic, and therefore there are theoretical concerns about that it could cause unwanted clotting. However, we see no evidence in the trials, ours and those from other research groups, that again I have combined in a meta-analysis in this slide. We find no evidence for an increased risk. The point estimates, again the squares on this point, are all very close to 1. In fact, they fall slightly on the side of favouring tranexamic acid. The confidence intervals are very wide. They do cross 1. So it does, due to thrombosis being extremely rare, so there is some uncertainty in these estimates. However, what the evidence does suggest to us, or does tell us, there is no evidence of an increased risk of thrombosis. as Alison said in her opening comments, that really largely based on the results of the woman trial, tranexamic acid has been incorporated into PPH guidelines worldwide. It was already on the essential medicines list, added in response to CRASH 2 for trauma. And then it also got incorporated into PPH guidelines from global bodies, particularly the WHO, and from FIGO, who all recommend giving tranexamic acid to women with a diagnosis of postpartum hemorrhage within 3 hours of birth. Oh, I'm just going to go just slightly back. So this was really huge. So tranexamic acid was and still is the only drug that has been proven in randomized controlled trials to reduce mortality. And so being able to influence guidelines, it was a really huge step in obstetric care. However, it sort of posed a question for us, which was, for some women, we saw it in our data, waiting until women were diagnosed with postpartum hemorrhage, for some women, was simply too late. We could see that some women die very quickly from postpartum hemorrhage in a matter of hours. And so we were concerned that waiting for a diagnosis of PPH, which can be based on an arbitrary diagnosis of arbitrary measure of blood loss, for example, for some women, it's just too late to prevent their death. So we wondered about whether there could be a case for actually giving tranexamic acid to all women giving birth, particularly those who are at high risk of dying from postpartum bleeding. Obviously, in women who are very low risk of death, that may not be appropriate, it may not be clinically appropriate, and it also may not be cost effective. But we thought perhaps there could be some women for whom it would make sense. And so we embarked on a modelling study where we estimated a threshold of risk of death from postpartum hemorrhage, that there would be a net benefit of giving all women TXA at the time of birth. And what we found is that there would be a net mortality benefit if we gave tranexamic acid in settings, and we did this by country, where the risk of death was 5 deaths per 100,000 births. Now, that includes large parts of South Asia, Southeastern Asia, and South America and Africa. And on this slide, in this map, it's shown by the countries in blue and that pinky colour. But we also wanted to look at cost effectiveness. And when we looked into we incorporated the costs of tranexamic acid and countries' ability to pay, we found that tranexamic acid was only cost effective in 17 of these countries, and they're the ones that are marked in blue. I should just say, because I think this will be relevant to some of the subsequent talks, that in this analysis, we used a single price of TXA, which was based on the UK price, which when we also incorporated an administration, to cover the cost of administration, but in total, that was just under five international dollars. And we used that estimate across the board for all countries. So we just use a single price estimate here. But what this analysis shows is that the clinical benefit of tranexamic acid is clear, but affordability is a real barrier to the clinical benefits of tranexamic acid being realised. And this is where the efforts need to be directed. Currently, the WHO recommends TXA, but only recommends intravenous TXA. Now, for some women, this means that they may not get tranexamic acid at all or as quickly as they need, because in some settings, in emergency settings, for example, or lack of qualified staff, gaining intravenous access is a barrier and may not be possible in the time frame. And so we took this quote from the WHO, this need for research, into other routes of administration. And so we have taken that call, and we have, as I mentioned earlier, we are currently working on a trial called Iron Woman that's investigating the effects of intramuscular tranexamic acid. We're comparing that to IV, TXA and placebo in women giving birth on the risk of developing a postpartum hemorrhage. We aim to recruit 40,000 women. We're currently at over 30,000 women recruited from hospitals in Africa and Asia. And we're hoping that the results will be available next year. But if, as we hope, it shows that IM Woman is equally as effective as IV TXA, that will really broaden the opportunity for tranexamic acid to be used in a much broader population of women, such as women who may give birth outside of hospitals or in settings where trained staff in IV access just aren't available. This is my last slide, and it's really important for me to just acknowledge that our group do big trials, but we cannot do it without these amazing collaborators that over the last 20 years has been a privilege to work with, who work so hard to produce this evidence. We wouldn't have the evidence if it wasn't for these people. And on this slide is just a fraction of the people that we have worked with. And of course, the patients who volunteer to be enrolled in our research. So it's really important for me that we acknowledge these contributions. And that's the end of my talk for now. Thank you for your attention, and I'll pass you back to Eva.
Thanks, Catherine. This was great. What a reminder of what it takes to get where we are, to have this huge step in obstetric care. You've been working on this for 20 years with, this is, as you said, a fraction of the people that you've been working with, and that acknowledgement is so important, and that of the patients who volunteered to be a part of this. Where would we be without this? We wouldn't be where we are. We wouldn't have these in the guidelines. We wouldn't have TXA in this bundled treatment. We're all waiting with bated breath for the IM information.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
Thank you again. I'm pleased to introduce our next two speakers who will present together. Our first is Ms. Nao Godoy. Naoko brings over 25 years of experience across the private sector and global health, specializing in strategic planning, policy development, program design, and market development to accelerate introduction and scale up of health products in resource-limited settings. Currently, she is the lead for market access at Jhpiego. Following Naoko, we'll hear from Beth Yeager. Beth is the Director of Market Access and System Strengthening for the Unitaid-funded MedSure program at USP, where she also leads the postpartum hemorrhage workstream. She brings more than 25 years of experience designing and implementing public health programs with deep expertise across both upstream and downstream supply chains, strengthening forecasting, procurement, manufacturer alignment, regulatory pathways, and last mile distribution to improve access to quality assured medical products. Naoko and Beth will speak to us today on TXA for postpartum hemorrhage, efforts to bring cost competitive, quality assured TXA to the market. Over to you, Naoko, first, and then you'll pass it to.
Great. Thanks, Eva. As Catherine just highlighted, TXA is safe and life-saving, but affordability is still an issue. So today, with my colleague Beth, we will discuss some of the efforts to make TXA more affordable and available. And I'll start with the work done in close collaboration between Jhpiego and PATH under the Amplify project. So just very quickly on the Amplify project, Amplify was launched in 2022 in 4 countries in partnership with Jhpiego and PATH, with funding from Unitaid, with 2 additional countries joining in mid-2024 with the funding from the European Union. Our work focused on generating evidence to inform scale-up, strengthening enabling environments to sustain progress, and increasing the availability of affordable quality PPH commodities with the ultimate goal of facilitating early adoption and scale up of these commodities. So when Amplify started in 2022, we initially conducted market assessments to understand the availability and affordability of PPH commodities. For TXA, we focused on 100 milligram per milliliter injection, as this is what is recommended for PPH treatment. And for the rest of my presentation, this is the product that we'll be focusing on. So while PPH indication can potentially increase the market size when fully funded, our market assessments found that quality assured TXA products are not widely registered in LMICs, and quality assured TXA products, if they're available, are more expensive than TXA products of uncertain quality. To address this challenge, limited availability of affordable quality assured TXA products, our funder, Unitaid, announced last year a new initiative to strengthen African pharmaceutical manufacturing called the MedSure. You will hear more about this project from Beth, but the MedSure project is intended to support African manufacturers to bring cost-competitive, quality-assured medicines to market, including TXA. One of the important questions for manufacturers planning market entry is how to price their product so that the product is competitive and yet affordable. So Amplify project worked to answer this question by conducting price benchmarking. So what are price benchmarks? Price benchmarks are the reference prices used to evaluate the price of a product against the broader market. They're developed from market information, such as prices that the target customers are currently paying for equivalent products and what prices have been achieved in tenders in similar markets. So these price benchmarks can help guide pricing decisions and evaluate different market launch options for manufacturers. So we approached price benchmarking from two angles. One is to understand the prices that the key purchasers are paying, and the second is to understand the prices that competitors are charging. So for the purchase prices, we looked at two groups of purchasers. First, UN organizations, because they require WHO pre-qualification or SRA or WA approval or equivalent as quality standards. And they also represent consolidated volumes across multiple countries. Second, global distributors that supply into UN organizations and NGOs, because they also require equivalent quality standards. These purchase prices were obtained through interviews with key personnel, as well as reviewing the online catalog. For the competitor prices, we use sales prices of Indian TXA manufacturers exporting to countries that have stringent regulatory authorities or WHO-listed authorities. We use these prices as a proxy for the broader market. All prices that I'll be presenting are either FCA or FCA equivalent, which means that these prices do not include international shipping. So in summary, we gather three sets of price benchmarks: UN organization purchase prices, global distributor purchase prices, and competitor sales prices. So here are the main findings. The graphs show price per unit of TXA, and we have two presentations, 5 milliliter and 10 milliliter. For 5 milliliter presentation, the lower ends of price benchmarks are similar across the three groups. So a competitive price in one group would be competitive across all three groups. And this also present larger saving opportunity for the UN and global distributor purchasers. For 10 milliliter presentation, the broader market spans the widest price range, with UN procurement prices generally positioned towards the mid to high end of the spectrum, while the global distributor prices skew towards the mid to low end of that spectrum. So based on this, our pricing recommendation for market launch price for TXA was less than 50 cents, US dollar 50 cents, for a 5 milliliter presentation for maximum saving potential for UN and global distributor purchasers. And if a 10 milliliter presentation is also offered, we recommend US $1. So these prices can be very competitive with the UN and global distributor purchasers while being relatively competitive in the broader market. Of course, other factors like lead time, shelf life can affect the overall competitiveness beyond pricing. So these need to be taken into account in setting the final pricing. But the most interesting finding from this analysis, though, is that the prices of a 10 milliliter TXA can be comparable or lower than the price of a 5 milliliter TXA. To clarify, the price shown here is the price per unit. So the price for 5 milliliter is the price per 1 5 milliliter ampule of TXA, while the price for 10 milliliter is the price per 1 10 milliliter ampule of TXA. So to calculate the cost of TXA for PPH treatment, you would have to double the price of 5 milliliter presentation to get to 1 dose of 10 milliliter needed for PPH treatment. So let's see what the cost of TXA for treatment looks like. Here we go. Okay. So as you can see, that if you are buying 5 milliliter for PPH treatment, switching to 10 milliliter presentation can potentially produce immediate savings, especially if the price of 5 milliliter TXA you are buying is closer to the higher end shown on this graph. There are 10 milliliter options that are cheaper and reduce the cost of PPH treatment. But what would providers want to switch? At the end of the day, it is the providers that administer TXA along with the rest of the bundle treatment when the woman is excessively bleeding and every second counts. So we asked the providers what they prefer. We sent an online survey through the newsletter of our consortium partner, Figo. We received between 94 to 130 responses, depending on the questions, from respondents across 23 countries who work across various levels of health systems. Results indicated that providers overwhelmingly prefer using a 10 milliliter presentation, with 91% saying they prefer 10 milliliter over 5 milliliter. When asked about why they prefer using 10 milliliter presentation for PPH treatment, 61% of those who responded to this question said they prefer 10 milliliter because it is easier to prepare and administer. 16% said because it poses a lower risk of dosing error. 13% said because it is faster to administer. In summary, based on benchmark prices, we recommend market entry price of less than 50 cents in US dollars for a 5 milliliter presentation and less than $1 for a 10 milliliter presentation. These prices can be competitive with the UN and global distributor purchasers with great potential for savings while being relatively competitive in the broader market. But there are also immediate cost reduction opportunities by switching to a 10 milliliter presentation, because the price of 10 milliliter presentation can be comparable or even cheaper than the price of 5 milliliter presentation. and providers overwhelmingly prefer the use of 10 milliliter presentation for PPH treatment. So in summary, Amplify work provided key insights into pricing strategy for TXA manufacturers, planning market entry, highlighted the immediate cost reduction opportunities, and produced important demand signal for product preference that is consistent with cost reduction opportunity. So now I hand it over to Beth for what comes next. Beth, take it away.
Thank you, Naoko, and thank you for the partnership that we at MedSure have been enjoying with Amplify and all of the hard work that you put into the price benchmarking and the data for preferences that you just presented. It's a useful input for the MedSure project moving forward. So good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today and very happy for the opportunity to introduce you to the MedSure project. So Naoko mentioned that MedSure is a UnitAid funded project, and it's part of UnitAid's Regional Manufacturing for Equitable Access, RMEA portfolio that aims to increase regional production of quality assured African-made products in ways that are cost competitive. We've been talking a lot about the importance of affordability thus far in this webinar, but also climate smart. And so the project began last July. We're just about a year old now, and will run through 2029. And some of the partners that are supporting us with various aspects of the project are listed here. Again, the goal of the project is to ensure broad, equitable access to quality assured, affordable medical products, not just for maternal health, which is obviously the focus of our presentation today, but for malaria and HIV as well. And so the project seeks to support manufacturers to develop their businesses and their business cases and market strategies to attract investment for greater impact. But we're also taking a look at the enabling environment to facilitate faster and streamlined market access. And then again, we're also looking at climate resilience and decarbonization by driving innovations in manufacturing to improve efficiency and sustainability, and ultimately, hopefully, affordability of the manufacturing process. And so this is the type of support that we will provide to manufacturers. It runs across the value chain. And so CMC, chemistry, manufacturing, and control, we're looking at improving the manufacturing processes of the selected manufacturers. And I won't, for the sake of time, because I think we're running out of it, I won't read through the sub-bullets, but we're looking at supporting manufacturers with their manufacturing processes, also looking at regulatory strategies, and this is related as well to access. So how can manufacturers access markets, achieve the regulatory approvals necessary to access new markets? And also the other more regulatory related aspects of obtaining that market approval, such as dossier preparation and CRO selection if bioavailability, bioequivalence studies are required. I've mentioned the sustainability aspects that we're looking into. And then the access bucket is where we have been partnering heavily with Amplify to date, looking at available markets, developing market model databases, working with manufacturers to develop go-to-market strategies and market shaping interventions, and providing that end-to-end commercialization support. So that's just an overview of the type of holistic support to manufacturers that we aim to provide. And now for the purpose of this particular webinar, I'd like to tell you a little bit about where we are with manufacturers of tranexamic acid on the continent. So last year, we issued a request for information to a lengthy list of manufacturers that are producing all sorts of products, but obviously including tranexamic acid. This was followed by a request for proposals to manufacturers that responded to the RFI. The RFP responses were then evaluated based on a host of technical criteria, including overall technical manufacturing capability, regulatory compliance, capability to manufacture and supply the specific products, and sort of the overall management competence of the manufacturer and the business. And then we reviewed the shortlist with Unity and considered additional factors such as geographical location, the volumes produced per annum, and regional demand. And we settled on support for two manufacturers of tranexamic acid. Tasa Pharma is based in Kenya. They are currently producing and selling within Kenya and have been exporting to a few other countries. The support to date has included mock audit preparation for a WHO pre-qualification audit that was conducted in June. So USP had been supporting TASA Pharmaceutical for their TXA product and their journey towards WHO pre-qualification prior to MedSure. They are very close at this juncture. This WHO pre-qualification audit in June was kind of the last step. And so we were hopeful that in the course of this year, if all goes as planned, they will be one of the very few African manufacturers of pre-qualification, WHO pre-qualification. And then we will continue to support them on their go-to-market strategy, including regulatory support as they seek to venture into other markets. And then the other manufacturer we'll be supporting is in the process of launching their product. This is Fitson Healthcare, and they are based in Nigeria. So again, we will be supporting them through from product development through WHO pre-qualification dossier submission, which we hope to help them achieve by November of this year. And then again, we'll also be supporting them with their go-to-market strategy development. And I will stop there for the sake of time. But thank you very much again for allowing me to share a little bit of MedSure, and looking forward to sharing with everyone the progress achieved at a later date. Thanks very much.
And this is super, super, super for us all to hear. I think sharing your work and your efforts on these projects, on how to bring cost competitive, quality assured TXA to the market. This is outside of a lot of our usual scope. So to learn it from two experts is really terrific. And of course, just waiting to see how this continues to evolve. So thank you so much. For our next section, we'll hear from two distinguished colleagues who will share the Democratic Republic of Congo's experience taking learnings and evidence from the Amplify project, the extensive evidence from Transform and other studies, and using them for action to begin the process of scaling up TXA for PPH treatment across DRC. Our speakers are Dr. Jhpiego Deogracias and Dr. Chantal Lusikila. Jhpiego is a public health specialist with a medical degree and more than 15 years of experience supporting DRC's Ministry of Health and strengthening primary health care. He currently leads the implementation of the Amplify project in DRC, supporting the introduction and scale-up of the WHO recommended package for the prevention and management of postpartum hemorrhage. Dr. Chantal is a medical doctor who specializes in reproductive health. For over 30 years, she's been actively involved in the public health sector in DRC. She previously served as Director of National Reproductive Health Programs and currently serves as the head of the Family Health and Specialized Care Division within the Ministry of Public Health. This portion of our webinar is in French, so if you have not selected interpretation and you need it, please do so now. Please also put any questions you may have in the chat. Our panelists will answer them as we go, because I think we're going to run out of time for them live. Over to you, Jhpiego and Chantal.
Merci beaucoup, Eva, pour cette excellente présentation, ainsi qu'au docteur Chantal, qui représente la République démocratique du Congo. J'aimerais poser quelques questions en lien avec l'expérience de la RDC dans l'introduction et la mise à l'échelle de l'approche émotive, et de manière particulière sur les TXA, l'acide tranexamique. Alors que la RDC s'engage dans la mise à l'échelle de l'utilisation de l'acide tranexamique, conformément aux recommandations de l'OMS et aux enseignements du projet Ampli, quelles stratégies sont envisagées pour garantir un financement durable de son approvisionnement? Plus précisément, comment le ministère de la Santé prévoit-il d'assurer que toutes les formations sanitaires offrant les services d'accouchement disposent des TXA afin de mettre en œuvre de manière pérenne les paquets complets de prévention et de prise en charge de l'hémorragie du postpartum? Merci. Chantal, à vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, docteur Dieu, pour cette question qui est vraiment très importante. C'est une question qui est au cœur de la stratégie de pérennisation, comme nous l'avons toujours dit, des projets, des acquis du projet. Alors, la RDC, qui est notre pays, capitalise sur les acquis du projet en cours pour accélérer la mise à l'échelle des recommandations de l'OMS. Alors, les données probantes générées soutiennent l'intégration progressive des innovations dans les politiques nationales, tandis que le plan de mise à échelle, la quantification, le besoin, euh, le renforcement des capacités, la supervision et l'engagement communautaire contribuent à garantir une mise en œuvre durable et de qualité. Ça, c'est au niveau pays. Néanmoins, notre priorité est de garantir un financement durable afin que toutes les femmes puissent bénéficier du paquet complet de prévention et de prise en charge des HPP. Et cela dans le cadre de l'approche inutile. Pour cela, le pays s'appuie sur plusieurs mécanismes qui sont complémentaires. Premièrement, le gouvernement renforce progressivement le programme de gratuité de la maternité dans le cadre de couverture santé universelle. Ces programmes visent à offrir gratuitement le service de santé maternelle et néonatale, y compris de médicaments essentiels pour la prévention et la prise en charge des HPP, dont l'acide tranexamique. Deuxièmement, il y a l'intégration du TXA dans la liste nationale des médicaments essentiels au niveau pays, dans les guides ainsi que les politiques, pourquoi pas dans le plan stratégique des programmes et directions clés qui représentent une avancée assez importante, très importante au niveau pays. Elle permet alors au ministère de la Santé de mobiliser plus efficacement l'appui des partenaires, dont l'INEPIE, qui est notre premier partenaire qui importe le produit de santé SR. Troisièmement, à travers le plaidoyer et la vulgarisation des acquis du projet, des politiques et des guides nationaux, nous encourageons les secteurs privés qui constituent déjà une source complémentaire d'approvisionnement, contribuer à améliorer la disponibilité des TXA, notamment dans les zones urbaines. Alors, bien entendu, les défis subsistent, ça c'est vrai. Les ressources nationales restent insuffisantes au regard des besoins d'un pays aussi immense que le nôtre, et la dépendance aux partenaires demeure majeure. Alors, c'est pourquoi les plaidoyers, la mobilisation des ressources et le renforcement du leadership national restent des priorités. En définitive, notre mission est claire: faire en sorte que l'acide tranexamique, comme l'ensemble du paquet innovatif, ne soit plus une innovation portée par un projet, mais plutôt une composante intégrée, financée et durable du système de santé congolais, en fait de sauver davantage de vies maternelles, pourquoi pas néonatales, par ricochet. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Chantal. Je vous poserai une deuxième question. En RDC, certaines zones de santé ont déjà acquis une expérience pratique dans la mise en œuvre des recommandations de l'OMS pour la prise en charge de l'hémorragie du postpartum intégrant la TXA, tandis que d'autres zones de santé pas encore. Comment le ministère de la Santé capitalise-t-il sur les leçons apprises, les bonnes pratiques et les données probantes générées lors de ces premières expériences afin d'orienter et d'optimaliser le déploiement du TXA et du paquet complet de prise en charge des hémorragies des postpartum? À vous.
Merci beaucoup pour cette deuxième question. Alors, comme on dit, notre pays, la RDC considère le projet Ampli comme une étape déterminante ayant généré des données probantes et de l'expertise nécessaire à la mise à échelle des recommandations de l'OMS. S'appuyant sur ces acquis, le ministère de la Santé met déjà en œuvre dans plusieurs provinces un plan national de mise à échelle de l'approche emotive qui fait intervenir les TXA et ainsi que de ces produits, notamment, comme je dis là, l'intervention de notre produit que nous appelons l'acide tranexamique. Alors, notre première priorité est de capitaliser sur les enseignements du projet en plus. Alors, le résultat ont démontré la faisabilité, l'acceptabilité et l'efficacité des innovations qui ont été introduites au niveau. Alors, ces données servent désormais de base scientifique pour orienter les décisions nationales ainsi que planifier cette extension que nous voulons tous. Deuxièmement, qui est notre deuxième priorité. Notre deuxième priorité est l'intégration de ces innovations dans les systèmes de santé. Alors, les recommandations sont progressivement intégrées dans les politiques nationales, les directives cliniques ainsi que le protocole de soins, les outils de supervision et les systèmes nationaux d'information sanitaire. Donc, il y a déjà des données que nous sommes en train de pouvoir récolter. Alors, parallèlement, il y a un plan national de dissémination et de vulgarisation qui est mis en œuvre. Et c'est là pour assurer une appropriation harmonisée à tous les niveaux du système de santé. Il y a également des réflexions qui se font, qui sont en train d'être menées pour actualiser les curriculums de formation médicale, pour tenir compte de ces innovations. Ça, c'est au niveau vraiment de base. C'est au niveau des ITEM, des universités. Alors, il y a des renforcements des capacités qui constituent également un biais essentiel grâce au projet rempli. La RDC dispose déjà aujourd'hui d'un pool de formateurs nationaux et provinciaux qui maîtrisent très bien l'approche emotive grâce à l'expérience que l'AMPU a donnée à tous. Et ces réseaux permettent de déployer une stratégie de formation en cascade dans les nouvelles provinces et des zones selon le plan de mise à échelle. Donc, bien entendu, les défis émergent, ça c'est vrai, et notamment en matière de financement durable et de chaînes d'approvisionnement, des coûts logistiques qui sont très élevés au vu de l'immensité de notre pays. Alors, là, nous avons également des infrastructures qui sont vraiment limites. Et nous pensons qu'avec l'appui de tous, nous pouvons arriver à tenir tête à cela. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, docteur Chantal, pour vos réponses très claires et pertinentes. Elles illustrent parfaitement l'engagement de la RDC en faveur de la mise à l'échelle des recommandations de l'OMS et de manière particulière l'acide tranexamique qui apporte des enseignements précieux pour d'autres pays. Merci beaucoup. À vous,
Merci
Eva.
beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chantal and Dr. Jhpiego. You're both incredible colleagues, and I know that this has been so helpful to our listeners today to learn what it takes to actually pull the evidence and learnings into action. So I know there's much more to your story, Chantal, and everything that you've been doing through the Ministry of Health and with partners, and we're looking forward to seeing that evolve over time. Unfortunately, dear colleagues, we don't have time to get to our Q&A. We have a few questions in the Q&A box, but in the meantime, I know you must have some, so please do send them to the email address that's in the chat, amplifyadmin@jhpiego.org. There should be you should see it in your chat. We want to hear your questions and we will answer them. In the meantime, before you sign off, please do take the opportunity to click on the QR code signaled there. If you haven't listened to all of the webinars in this series, this is the 5th one, but that QR code will give you all of the recordings. And then lastly, before we sign off completely, we invite you to click the QR code on your left hand of your screen, which is the International Journal of Gynecology and Obstetrics supplement, on Amplify's work, which is now available. And then on the very right side of your screen, we invite you to sign up for the Women Trials newsletter. Right in the middle is the QR code for the Amplify repository, so you can have access to Amplify webinar recordings and a lot of our other learnings. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. For all of our speakers, you are amazing, and the work that you do has made such enormous impact already. I'm excited to hear, and I know our participants are, how it evolves over time. Thank you again, everybody, for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.